Hi everyone, this is Lorraine Driscoll, and this is another episode of Building Better Brains, where each week we explore the root causes of why your child might be having a hard time at learning, reading, and behaving, and what you can do, what solutions you can tap into that go way beyond the limitations of endless tutoring, IEPs, and medication. Those can definitely be tools in your toolkit, but they don't particularly help to overcome a disorder. They're more intended to help manage it. So last time I talked about reading comprehension disorders and so forth. And today I want to kind of go a little bit into something related, but not exactly, and that is writing disorders, particularly dysgraphia. So if you suspect that your child might have a disorder or difficulties, or that something is going on with writing, then this episode is definitely for you. So what do you do if your child hates to write? It's not totally uncommon, right? There's lots of kids who just hate bookwork, reading, writing, and so forth, and it doesn't necessarily mean they have a disorder. And however, there is a lot of instances where kids are written off as being lazy, sloppy, careless, that they're just not paying attention enough because their handwriting is illegible. They don't want to write, period. And their handwriting, when they do write, is illegible and it's not pretty. And so this could be a clue or a cue that your child has dysgraphia. And dysgraphia is very related to dyslexia. There's a lot of children who have dyslexia who also have dysgraphia, or they have dysgraphia and dyspraxia, which is clumsiness and so forth. However, it can totally happen in isolation. I've worked with clients more than once where dysgraphia is the only thing that's a problem. So this is a disorder that is specific to writing. It's a language-based disability, so that's why it is related to reading disorders and so forth. And you might be asking yourself, what is the underlying cause? Well, the underlying cause is that I find it's very similar to dyslexia. And I shouldn't say I find, it is very similar to dyslexia in terms of some of the factors that can contribute to its development, as well as other reading disorders and so forth. So some of those factors, as you know, if you've watched my episodes before, I often talk about the importance of nutrition. So definitely nutrition plays a role. However, visual processing, retained primitive reflexes, underdevelopment in the brain, all of those are factors that can contribute to the development or worsening, if you will, of dysgraphia. Lack of fine motor skills is kind of the defining factor with dysgraphia as well as dyspraxia, but particularly dysgraphia, just lacking those fine motor skills to write neatly and so forth. And as you know, or if you have a child with this problem, poor coordination affects everything. It affects the ability to maneuver in your world, which is why we do see such a high rate of dyspraxia with dysgraphia. And it affects the simplest things to being able to write, do art, and other, fine motor activities, if you will. So some of the markers are these kids have a really hard time writing their ideas on paper. Their handwriting, as I mentioned, is illegible, and handwriting in general just tends to be really laborious. It takes them much longer to write, and they tend to hate writing, these kids. And often, my experience, both having been a full-time teacher for many years, as well as just what I hear from parents and teachers and so forth, is that these are the kids who can be really disruptive, and oftentimes the dysgraphia might not even get picked up right away because they're so disruptive or so disengaged at school that it looks more like a behavior, when dysgraphia is the reason why they're being disruptive, because they're trying to take attention away from the fact that they can't write, or they can't write and they're just bored. And so writing for these guys just requires so much mental energy. And that's because basically they're having to process their thoughts. They're having to think about what they want to put down on paper. They're having to organize their ideas. If they're answering comprehension questions, say for a story they read, they have to kind of do all of that processing and planning, and they have to concentrate on all of the aspects required for writing. So basically it feels like, I want to say they're doing 2 things at once, but really it can feel like they're doing 10 things at once. So if you're wondering what this feels like, imagine, so let me tell you, I've played drums once in my life for about 20 minutes. And it was like really hard. I had no interest in ever learning to play drums past that. Someone tried to teach me, I'm like, no. And definitely I lacked some growth mindset there and quit maybe too early. But I think of that experience and how difficult it was to get the right hand to do something different than the left hand. And this is exactly what difficulty with or dysgraphia can feel like, is that it feels like you're trying to process your thoughts and do all of the activities that are required to do writing at the same time. And so what is required for writing? Well, because you've been doing it for so long, you might not realize all of the factors that are involved. But simultaneously, you are managing your fine motor skills, you are paying attention to spelling and grammar, you are paying attention to syntax, so the placement of do I put the verb before or after and so forth. You're paying attention without realizing, or you've automatized the spacing between the letters and the words. And on top of that, you have organized, planned, and carefully worded as best as you can your thoughts and concepts. So that's a lot of things at once, which, I mean, our brain is amazing. It can do these things. But for these kids, because there are weak connections, for all kinds of reasons, this can be a huge problem where this just is an impossible task. And it's like asking them to do 10 things at once. For us, it is automatized. So basically, kids with dysgraphia, this feels like an insurmountable task. And it's no wonder that they give up, and they can often be the kids at the back of the classroom who just won't do anything. And this is where, for the time being, until you address the root cause, assistive technology can be really helpful, whether it's something they speak into. For some of these kids, they're okay typing, but it's the writing, which activates a different part of the brain than typing. It is not the same thing, which is why there's such a push to bring back handwriting, cursive handwriting, and more writing, particularly just pen or pencil to paper in schools as opposed to typing. So what are some clues that your child has dysgraphia, or if there's some kind of weakness? It's not always dysgraphia, but something you want to look further in or address. Number one is poor pencil grip. So pencil grip is something that teachers used to explicitly teach and say, no, you have to hold it this way. And if you didn't, you had that little thing on the end of your pencil to make sure your fingers are holding it properly. We don't do that anymore. The philosophy in education is that kids will just kind of naturally hold the pencil properly as they evolve. And that might be true for most children. But when there is underdevelopment in lower brain levels, when there is difficulty with fine and gross motor skills, that may never happen unless it's explicitly taught and kind of almost like forced, if you will. Like you need to you're holding your pencil incorrectly. Again, you need to place your fingers like this. The other factor is these kids can sometimes really contort their body in some really interesting positions when they have to write. And they might angle their head in weird positions. So to really drive home what I mean by contort, I knew a child who could only write and concentrate and focus on what she was doing if she was laying down in her bed and her legs were up the wall. Then she could do her homework like nobody's business. And I know lots of kids who they are fine as long as they're laying on their belly on their bed or the carpet or the classroom floor, and then they can write. And so what is going on with that is that basically these kids have really weak core muscles. They're underdeveloped, and it's not just that. There's usually a whole bunch of other factors. But if those lower brain levels are not fully developed, and the cortex, right, the higher brain level, which is responsible for all those other important aspects like writing, is now having to do the job of balancing and maintaining posture and so forth. And so that cannot take place where they can write and concentrate and manage their posture and so forth. So that is why, for example, this girl was able to actually focus and write only whenever she was laying on her bed on her back with her legs up, because now her core muscles and all of that balancing aspect is no longer required, and her brain can just entirely focus on the task of writing and all that involves. So the big overlooked factor with dysgraphia is poor posture, the weak core muscles, the underdeveloped brain levels, and so forth. And that's often why it's not uncommon for these kids to have an awkward gait, for them to be kind of slumpy. This is another reason why they get labeled as lazy and just sloppy, because they're often on their desk like this to write, and like that's probably me that is me being generous. Oftentimes they're laying on their desk to write, and so it looks like they're just, you know, up too late and so forth, which could be a factor, but it just goes to show that what the behavior looks like is not necessarily what's going on inside the brain. So why this is happening, basically the sensory motor system is not fully developed. The sensory motor system is the first areas of the brain to develop, and this has to be developed in order for the other functions, like you know, the cortex, for example, to do its job and only its job. Because when the lower brain levels are not developed in infancy optimally, then the cortex, the higher brain, has to do the job of the lower brain levels, and this prevents the cortex from doing its job. And so how do I put this in real terms? Well, what I often tell parents is it is like the doctor has shown up to the hospital for work today, and he has all this great knowledge and can do surgery and do all kinds of life-saving things, but the secretary's not there, and the you know, custodial staff hasn't shown up, and the nurses aren't there, and he's having to do everybody else's job, and so he can't do his own job. And so the cortex's job is processing, planning, organizing, writing, and reading, and all of those really cognitive tasks, including things like impulse control and emotional regulation. So what is the solution? The solution is addressing the underlying cause. And the underlying cause, first off, I always look at nutrition. Things like essential fatty acids, like DHA, have a huge impact on the nerve cells that are responsible for the sensory motor system. That's been studied time and time again for decades. Dare I say the research is irrefutable. So addressing the underlying cause in terms of, is the brain getting what it needs? And then obviously developing those lower brain levels, developing those gross muscles, those fine motor, those muscles required for fine motor skills. And that's something else I want to touch on, is that oftentimes we think that the kid just needs more practice, that if we could just get him to practice his handwriting a little bit more, then his writing will be better and so forth. Practice does not make perfect if we're doing the wrong exercise. And if we are just working on the fine motor muscles in the hand, the writing is not going to get better. And you can ask the kid this, because he'll tell you, all of my friends have been writing just as much as I have, and my writing still sucks. So, and I've literally heard kids say that in my office. And also exercises that integrate the left and right brain hemispheres. I've seen that be a big factor, as well as top to bottom processing and back to front processing in the brain. So if you are interested in hearing more about what you can do to help your child with writing, or even perhaps reading difficulties, hop onto my website, take the free quiz, check out my programs, Reading Rockstar Bootcamp, as well as the Full Potential Clinic, to learn more about how you can target the underlying factors of why your child might be having a hard time learning, reading, and behaving. Basically, I'm a personal trainer for your child's brain. I make sure that your child's brain is, first of all, being nourished and getting everything it needs to function optimally, and then we're going to give it some exercises to make sure that the brain can work to its full potential, and your child can feel more successful and be more confident. So if you want to set up a free 20-minute phone call to see if my programs might be right, or tell me what exactly is going on, feel free to do that. If you found this video helpful, please share. Thanks for watching.